Have you ever wondered how each and every one of us fit into the scheme of things politically in today's political environment? You know, after watching many hours of both Republican and Democratic contenders go after each other with a vengeance and seeing how they individually and collectively can motivate millions of people to their particular way of thinking, their particular cause. Now, although this is informative, kind of makes you feel a bit inferior. And let me just say what I mean by that. That is, sometimes we wonder just who are we in the total scheme of things, individually, and what can we do? Trump's demonstrating how the whole system is totally corrupt, only the big money brokers and their lobbyists winning control of the system. Bernie Sanders, a hardcore socialist, is also saying the same thing. You know what? They're both right. Those of us who believe in the principles upon which the Tea Party and 9/12 organizations were founded saw this in 2008, and we tried to change it. It was the Tea Party's leadership that made it possible for the Republican Party to control both the House and the Senate. And we found that both John Boehner and Mitch McConnell did nothing with the power that we gave to them from 2010 because they were playing Mr. Obama's game. But you know, it's not really Mr. Obama's game. It's a game of the powerful super money interests that have controlled both parties and their leaders for more than a century. They don't care about whose party is in power as long as they control the wealth of this and every other nation where they operate from. That is why I was so pleased to see Mark Burcher running for the Congress of the United States, because I believe he's the only person running for the U.S. Congress that is an anti-establishment candidate that we need in the Congress, and particularly here from the 13th Congressional District. Well, I really don't want to stray too much from my regular presentation, and essentially what I'm trying to do here, and with your indulgence, I'm going to try to demonstrate through an Old Testament character that I love dearly and reading about and studying is Gideon, and how that applies today to each and every one of us. So while this may sound like a sermon, believe me when I tell you it's not a sermon. I just lost my place. Here we go. One of the most moving characters in Old Testament scripture is the story of Gideon, because it represents what one person can do when he has the power of God on his side. It's a story about one man called to save the nation of Israel. There's also a story about a man who had a very low esteem of himself and why he thought he wasn't capable of doing anything for his nation or anyone else for that matter. But he was called by God to bring a great victory to the nation of Israel, but a man who viewed himself as wholly inadequate. Now you just stop and think about sometimes how we feel in a total scheme of things. Do we really feel adequate in being able to get something done when you see the millions of people who are involved and how we might play into that? You know, it was written that the good Lord saw the evil that the children of Israel had committed, and so he sent the Midianites to take over their country for 7 full years, and they came by the thousands with their camels and dromedaries, and they just practiced a scorched earth policy. They made slaves out of the young men, and they made concubines out of the women. To protect themselves, the Israelites fled to the mountains to live in caves, and they kept crying out to be saved from the Midianites. Well, eventually hearing their prayer, and the reason I use this as an example is when we look at what has happened to this country since 2008, There are us who just cry out constantly for divine intervention to stop all this and bring us back to where we were at that time. You know, at that time, Gideon was out there thrashing wheat at night to keep it away from the Midianites because of the fact that they would have probably been killed if they caught him. But the angel came down from the Lord to tell him, Gideon, you are a mighty warrior. The Lord wants you to free Israel from the Midianites. Now again, I say, don't we sometimes find ourselves in that position and thinking about what can we feel sometimes humbled and inadequate to be able to make an impact into what's going on today. We try through clubs, we try through the PCREC, we try through working with national candidates. We want to be part of that, but sometimes we feel almost insignificant. You know, you work hard, mom and dad both in the workplace trying to keep bread on the table. Meanwhile, our children are in the hands of those who teach them that abortion's okay, that emulate movie stars and their lifestyle of alcohol, drugs, and immorality. They teach our youth that premarital sex is acceptable if they use protection. Today we find ourselves with food and gas prices at an all-time high, often making it difficult to make ends meet. And we simply don't know what, if anything, we can do about it. Because we trusted our elected officials to look out for our interest. Not their own self-serving special interests, but our interests. And so we cry out with that age-old question, why is all this happening to us? You know, when the angel of the Lord came down to give Gideon his mission for God, he said to Gideon, Gideon, the Lord is with you, O mighty man of valor. Well, Gideon's first reaction is, wait a minute, I'm no mighty man of valor. As a matter of fact, my family is the weakest in our tribe, and I'm the weakest in my family. And how can I be a great warrior? And he also said, well, Mr. Angel, let me ask you something. If the Lord is with us, then why is all this happening to us? And where are all the miracles which our fathers told us about in delivering us from the hands of the Egyptians? You know, it's interesting because we say, why is all this happening to us? What did we do beginning in 2008 to allow this whole thing to begin and manifest itself? And I will tell you that we are watching a great manifestation of competing social and political interest. You've got mainstream establishment in the middle. You've got Donald Trump over here calling mainstream establishment corrupt and dirty. You've got Bernie Sanders over here and how he found so many socialists that are in support of his whole philosophy in this country. And I grew up when if you even thought like a communist, you were outed. You were ostracized. You were run out. They did that in the 1950s in the motion picture industry. And Ronald Reagan was at the forefront of that effort. But today, we now have two strong competing interests. Hardcore socialists on one side, Donald Trump on the other side, and in the middle, you've got Hillary Clinton and the mainstream establishment. And by the way, there are those who would suggest that there's very little difference between main establishment Democrats and those who are Republicans serving the exact same interests. So when he got his charge, and that angel said to him, go in your power and save Israel. In other words, go in your power and save your country. And Gideon's response is pretty much like most of us if we were given that charge. Can you imagine being given the charge that go save your country and we're going to put you in a position to save your country? Gideon's response was, oh my Lord. He had a real problem with that phrase, oh my Lord. How can I save Israel? Indeed, my clan is the weakest of Manasseh, and I am the least in my father's house. Can you see how he viewed himself? He viewed himself as a big fat zero. He did not see himself as a man of valor. You know, if you multiply zero by any number, what do you get? Zero. Well, I'll tell you something. You start multiplying zero by the power of God, and you can't count the numbers. The story of Gideon is history. As you know, with the power of God on his side, he and 300 others rid the whole nation of Israel of the Midianites. So it doesn't take much if you got the power with you to clean up this mess we're living in today here in the United States. And our last chance is going to be November 2016. How many of you living in this great democracy, things as they are, and feel helpless to influence any change? How many of you feel like there is nothing you can do to change what has become the status quo in our society, a society of increasing crime rate, a society of greed among corporate executives who bleed consumers and their shareholders and their companies dry, forcing them into a position of bankruptcy or government bailouts, a society of public corruption at all levels of government, a society where lobbyists and special interest groups control those whom we have elected to represent us. A society where those who have rejected Judeo-Christian principles control national media and entertainment industry in an effort to manipulate our thinking and morality. These are the same institutions that are corrupting the hearts and minds of our children. A society that continues to face the threat of terrorism that took the lives of 3,000 innocent people on September the 11th, 2001, and continues to be a serious threat to our very fabric of our existence, threatening every man, woman, and child in our nation, now and in the future. So many of us view ourselves as only one person, unable to do anything to correct that which undermines all of the principles upon which this country was founded. And that is which and all those things in which we believe, especially those of us who are Christians. Our nation is plagued by the elements of the ungodly that want to take God out of our lives, who seek to eliminate every public reference to God and Jesus Christ from our society under the guise of the constitutional provision that mandates freedom of religion. Unfortunately, our federal courts, some more liberal than others, believe that the First Amendment of the United States Constitution should be interpreted to mean freedom from religion, not freedom of religion. Their efforts are contrary to every principle established by our founding fathers, which made it crystal clear that we are one nation under God. The Constitution and the Declaration of Independence and other important national documents established by our founding fathers both recognized and professed the existence of God and that God is our foundation. Today we live in an environment where our nation is plagued by pedophiles who surf the internet to target our children. A nation plagued by a printed and electronic media that attacks anyone who seeks to protect unborn babies from being killed indiscriminately by the abortionist. A nation plagued with overflowing jails and prisons. A nation where illegal drugs are rampant throughout every element of our society. And a nation where individual freedoms are being eroded. We're a nation where fraud in our election process is rampant. Soon, the most important election in the history of this country will take place. The future of our democracy, our economy, and many of our freedoms may hinge on the results of this election. Diminished individual rights, encroaching socialism, one world economy may be our future if things don't change. Our future may be a society where the rights of a U.S. citizen may be very well decided by the United Nations and less by the American judicial system. The economic crisis we face today began many years ago, and we made it even worse in recent years by misguided legislators. And now we are paying the price for what our elected officials and representatives did or failed to do. At the time of the original 13 states being adopted, and it had adopted the U.S. Constitution, there was a guy named Alexander Tyler, a Scottish history professor at the University of Edinburgh, had said this about the fall of the Athenian Republic 2,000 years earlier. It's important to remember this and apply it to what we've seen now since 2008. A democracy will continue to exist up until the time the people discover that they can obtain for themselves generous gifts from the public and the public treasury. From that moment on, the majority always seeks those who promise the most benefit from the public treasury, with the result that every democracy will finally collapse due to loose fiscal policy, which is always followed by a dictatorship. You know, reflecting back over the history of our nation, people from all over the world left their native countries where many of them were held in bondage to come to this country. And I think Cheryl can relate to that probably as good as anybody else. They came from bondage to developing their spiritual faith in America. As time and history developed, they grew from spiritual faith to great courage, and from great courage to liberty. The liberty brought and paid for a liberty that was bought and paid for by the ultimate sacrifices of millions of men and women who fought and died in several wars so that we may enjoy the freedoms that we have today. From this hard-fought liberty, we now find ourselves seeking abundance in our lives and for our families as well. Today, this abundance is leading us to complacency, which will eventually lead us to apathy. If we learned anything from history of others and other civilizations, apathy ultimately leads to dependence, and that dependence will bring us to the people back to bondage at the hands of an all-powerful central government similar to that from which our ancestors escaped. Keep in mind that what has been said here today, it's important that you and members of your family and your friends pray about this country. I cannot stress the importance. I'll say one thing for my lovely wife, Marie. Every night at the dinner table, besides praying for my silly soul, she prays for the United States of America and pleading with God to straighten out all this evil and get rid of all this evil that has befallen upon us. Let us not forget what God had told Solomon in 2 Chronicles. If the people who are called by my name shall humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven and will forgive their sins and heal their land. I ask that everybody here and everybody who watches this video to please pray for our country. You know, you may feel that your single effort is meaningless in the total scheme of things. It's your single effort merged with millions of others that can bring qualified leadership to this nation as we go through these difficult times. Again, I say pray for this country and for those elected officials who share our faith and our love of God so that they may be guided to work for us. In essence, like Gideon, I say to you, go in your power and save your country. I want to play right now a short video that was produced and directed by Dr. Sharon Kander Cook, a PhD out of California, a professor, one of the few California professors that I know is an ultra-conservative. She produced this in 2010, and it's still relevant today, even though it's directed at the President of the United States. I have found it so meaningful and it's distributed so many places, but I can tell you that more than 10 million people have seen this. 10 million people have seen this short video. So with your indulgence, let's see if I can bring this thing up. You see that?
Dear President Obama, we, the people, have stated resolutely we reject your vision for our country. We, the people, have assembled across America resisting your efforts to subvert our Constitution and undermine our values. You claim you have not seen us. Since you have not acknowledged our message, treasure is freedom, the absence of restraints on our ability to think and to act. The corollary of freedom is individual responsibility. A few years ago, we said, history moves toward freedom because the desire for freedom is written in every human heart. Let us add that we will preserve it only as long as devotion to freedom is expressed in the heart of our actions. When President Lincoln dedicated Gettysburg National Cemetery, he declared, "It is for us, the living, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who fought here have thus so nobly advanced." That unfinished cause for which our soldiers willingly go to battle and for which so many have given their lives is a free United States of America. It has been nearly 150 years, and the work President Lincoln spoke of is not finished. In fact, that work will never be finished. Freedom is the capacity for self-determination. It is not an entity, but a condition, and conditions change. Freedom can expand, yet so can it contract. You promised change when you took office this, Mr. President, but subjugation is not change we wanted or will accept. You have expanded government, violated our Constitution, confounded laws, seized private industry, destroyed jobs, perverted our economy, curtailed free speech, corrupted our currency, weakened our national security, and endangered our sovereignty. By compromising our nation's cultural, legal, and economic institutions, you are ensuring that our children will never achieve the same quality of life as we enjoy today. Through generational theft, you are robbing the unborn of opportunity. This is not acceptable, not in America. We did not become a strong nation through hope, but rather through self-reliance. No one better understands the relationship between individual achievement, dignity, and strength than our armed forces. Through every war, our soldiers have held this nation's destiny in their hands. They have not failed us. They cherish freedom enough that they are willing to die for it. Our duty to them and to ourselves is to treasure freedom enough to live up to it. We accept the challenge, Mr. President. That is why we are assembling across the land to deliver our message to you as often and in every way we can. Dismiss us at your political peril. Our great nation is a republic. We will not accept tyranny under any guise. Your policy to redistribute the fruits of our labor is statism and will not be tolerated. By our honor, Mr. President, we vow forever to resist coercive government in America. Patriots will not stand silent as you attempt to dismantle the greatest nation on earth. We, the people, will defend our liberty. We will protect our beloved country, and America's exceptionalism will prevail. God bless the United States of America. Sincerely, we, the people.
Wow. That piece was written 5 years ago, and it still chokes me up when I hear it. Sharon Cook is a very special lady, and I got to know her personally, and I'm going out to California in July, and hopefully we'll be able to spend a day or two with her and her husband. They are two very great Americans who believe in American exceptionalism, and they continue the battle from California. Okay, they continue this battle. I want to take this opportunity to thank each and every one of you who are here this evening. I think the point I was trying to make, that sometimes we feel insignificant, but we have the power, individually and collectively. We know not what's going to happen. We pray that cool heads will prevail so that Hillary Clinton does not, under any circumstance whatsoever, become President of the United States. And so again, I want to thank you. It's my pleasure to be here, and Cheryl, I thank you for inviting me.